An international trade transaction, no matter how straightforward it may seem at the start, is not completed until delivery has taken place. Any other obligation have been fulfilled and seller has received payment. This may seem obvious, however, even seemingly simple transactions can and sometimes do go wrong. There are many reasons why these things happen, but behind them all is the basic fact that the risk assessment of the transaction and or the way these risks were covered went wrong. An example is the risk assessment of the customer, where exporters do not always fully realize that some large countries are divided into regions or states, often with different cultures, which may affect trade pattern and practices. In some countries, what the seller thought was a signed contract may just be seen as a letter of intent by the buyer until it also has been countersigned by a more senior and internally authorized manager. Or it may be that the seller has agreed to terms that were previously used but are not suitable in a changed environment or due to changes in their own business. Another reason may be that the parties simply did not use the same terminology or did not focus on the details of the agreed terms of payment. This would inevitably lead to undefined terms, potentially subject to future dispute, something that may not be revealed until delivery has been made. When the seller is in a weaker bargaining position, even though such errors may not result in non payment, it is more likely that they will lead to delays in payment with an increased commercial and or political risk as a consequence. Another common consequence of unclear or undefined terms of payment is that the seller may have outstanding claims on the buyer, or that the buyer is of the same opinion with regard to the seller and takes the opportunity to make unilateral payment deductions owing to real or alleged fault or deficiencies in the delivery. Each area of international trade requires its own knowledge, from the first contact between buyer and seller to final payment. One such area of expertise is how to develop professional and undisputed terms of payment and how to solve currency and trade finance questions is a competitive ways. These areas are of vital importance both in the offer and in subsequent contract discussion, not just within difficult countries or market or an larger, more complicated deals, but also in quite ordinary day-to-day transactions. The choice of currency could be of great importance, particularly in an increasingly competitive market, and the ability to extend finance has become a major competitive factor in negotiation. In such an environment, the terms of such credits are mostly to the advantage of the buyer, and as a consequence, demand for longer credit periods and more advantageous terms has increased. When it comes to similar or repetitive transactions with known customers, both terms of payment and currency and financial alternatives can often be developed as standard models, but must in other cases be adapted to each transaction and its specific preconditions. This is even more obvious when considering the basic structure of international trade. Involving more than 150 countries, including many developing and emerging markets. In many of these markets, the structuring of the terms of payment is the key to secure and profitable business. Every transaction contains many different preconditions, apart from aspects such as the buyer, the country, the nature of the goods, size, extent, and complexity. This requires the seller to carry out an individual risk assessment and make decisions that ensure a profitable and secure deal with a level of risk that is both defined and accepted at the outset. It is therefore of a great importance for both buyer and seller to know how to structure practical terms of payment. In practice, this often means that during negotiations, the seller must be willing and able to compromise, even when it comes to specific questions related to guarantees, payments, currency, and finance. In these situations, and often together with other difficult negotiations, it is important to understand the connections between these parts, what is essential to hold on to, and what can be waived. Any successful negotiation must give reasonable and equal consideration to the demands of both commercial parties in order to find a compromise and avoid unnecessary discussions or misunderstandings. The experienced seller will always try to avoid such situation where by strengthening also the potential for future business deals, provided that fundamental demands have been met to safeguard the transaction. This handbook should be used as a reference manual in the practical day to day business of the international trading company within the sales, shipping, administrative, back office department. For a small and medium sized companies that do not always have the specialist finance functions in house, that is obvious, but this will also be the case even within the largest companies, where a specialization often means that many employees may have detailed knowledge in some but not all of these financial areas. This goes on only for the exporting companies, but also within importing companies buying goods or services from abroad. Many comments and references will also be made in this book about the interactive negotiating process between the commercial parties in an international trade transactions. Useful knowledge for both the seller and the buyer. That is exactly the way these handbooks have been used over the years.